Well, good afternoon. Good to be here with everyone. See if I can get set here. Okay. So when we look at days and the different times we celebrate, each of us has days in our life that are special days, that are different than the other ordinary days in our lives, right? So these are days that are ordinary to most people, but in our household, they're extra special to us, right? So in our household, October 14th is a special day. Now, in your household and a lot of people's household, October 14th is just another normal day. But in our household, that's my birthday. That's a special day that we set aside and we celebrate, right? Or December 14th, that's another special day in our house. That's Amy's birthday, another day we set aside to celebrate special time in our household. That would be an otherwise ordinary day for most people. Now, you may be at the point where you don't really even enjoy having a birthday anymore, right? Some of us have gotten to that point where it doesn't have quite the same fun and excitement behind it that it used to. But we can all remember a time when we look forward to birthdays. We can all remember a time where we were excited and we couldn't wait for our birthday to come. Now, some birthdays are more special than others, right? There are some that you probably have forgotten about completely, and there are some birthdays you've had that may be stuck in your mind. Maybe your sweet 16 birthday or something like that, but you probably have a birthday that's stuck in your mind as an extra special birthday. For Amy, I know her best birthday was December 14th, 2007, and I'm pretty sure if you ask her, she still couldn't tell you any of the gifts that I had gotten her on that birthday, but it was still a very special birthday for her. For me, my most special birthday was October 14th, 2017. It was my 40th birthday. And I can remember exactly what both my boys got me for that birthday. See, I remember I got a kid's pirate hat. I got this soccer ball here, which is a little deflated now, right? And then I also got this little stuffed penguin right here. And a 4x4 Rubik's Cube as well, that Noah remembers quite well. But I can remember getting those gifts from them. Now, there's nothing extra special about those particular gifts, right? But I remember them. I was with the boys when they got them at Walmart, right? They weren't even a surprise to me. I knew what I was getting from them. But you see, it wasn't the gifts themselves that was so important and that made that birthday so special. Part of it had to do with the location. You see, these gifts weren't purchased at Walmart in Hampstead or Westminster. These gifts were purchased at Walmart in Guangzhou, China. And I was given them at the nearby Garden Hotel where we were staying there in Guangzhou. The real reason my 40th birthday was so special was because 5 days earlier, at the Children's Welfare Institute in Chengdu, China, Nathan joined our family. God had given me an incredible early birthday present that I will never, ever forget. And I got to spend my 40th birthday with my family of 4. Rewind back to December 14th, 2007, Amy's favorite birthday. As I said, she could not tell you the gift that probably anyone gave her, but 2 days earlier, as she stood at the top of the steps in our townhome, she was holding a pregnancy test that said positive. And after the emotional roller coaster of months and months of trying to get pregnant, God had given her an early birthday present as well, and we knew that Noah was coming soon. So those times were special times for us, times that really stand out. And we set aside these times, birthdays, anniversaries, things like that, to remember something God has done or something that's happened that's important to us in our own lives, right? And our country, as Americans, we do this as well. There are certain holidays that our country has set aside as special days. You think about Memorial Day, a day we set aside to remember those who died serving our country. Or we think of the 4th of July, Independence Day, a day where we celebrate the birthday of our nation. These are days that we as Americans have set aside to celebrate and remember things that have been done in our past. And we also have holidays we celebrate that focus on God and something He has done, right? We think about Easter, where we're focused on Jesus and His resurrection from the dead. And the whole reason we celebrate Easter is because someone at some point in time in history decided that the resurrection of Jesus was such an important holiday, such an important thing, that we were going to center a day around it to remember it. And you think about Christmas. That's another one of the holidays that we celebrate. In remembering Jesus' birth, which is coming shortly here for us. And that's another holiday where someone at some point in time in history said, the birth of Jesus is so important, we're going to set aside a day to remember it each and every year so that we don't forget. And then in the church calendar, we've added other days too to remember for God. If you've got your bulletin here, you see a couple different circular calendars on the back. The bottom one, the colorful one, is the liturgical church calendar. So you'll see things on here like Easter, and you'll see Christmas, but there's also other things added in. Right before Easter, you see Lent on there, right? And Lent is that time of preparation. So the church decided at some point in time that Easter was so important, we weren't just going to celebrate one day. We were going to take 40 days to prepare our heart and to make personal sacrifices to try to prepare ourselves for the celebration of Jesus. And then we have Advent leading up to Christmas too, where somebody decided that we're going to take 4 weeks leading up to Christmas to focus on Jesus and his birth and to get our hearts and our minds ready for that. So we have these special days set aside, and they're things that we're used to celebrating together as people. And they're all there because people decided to take otherwise ordinary days and make them extraordinary days. And God has also established holidays himself. All of these holidays we've talked about so far, all of these special days, they have one thing in common. Somebody sometime in history decided this is a good thing to do. We're going to start celebrating this. But God himself actually instituted certain holidays. And they're recorded in Leviticus chapter 23. We read a couple of them already this morning, but there's more if you continue to read down the chapter in Leviticus 23. We mentioned the Passover, that God established that holiday so his people will remember that he is the one that led them out of Egypt. There's a Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, that many of us are familiar with, another holiday that God set aside for his people to celebrate each and every year. There's 3 fall festivals as well, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles. They're all in this circular calendar up here on the top part, different holidays that have been set aside to celebrate. And these are all ones that God himself set aside. Now, they're commanded for the Jewish people in Leviticus 23. The people at the time that are following God, the Jewish people, he is commanding them, these are holidays I have set aside for you. And this is important because these are people that have been slaves their entire lives, and now God is setting them up as a nation and establishing them, and he's giving them special days to remember him. And he says several different times in Leviticus 23, in reference to several of the holidays, that this is supposed to be a lasting ordinance. Now, lasting ordinance doesn't mean until you get into the promised land. It doesn't mean until you're carried away into exile. It doesn't mean until Jesus comes and rises from the dead. Lasting ordinance means forever. So this is something that God has commanded for his chosen people, the Jewish people, to celebrate each and every year forever. Now, these things are not commanded for Gentiles. These commands are specifically for the Jewish people. And so as a Gentile, we are not commanded to celebrate these holidays. But they're holidays that are designed to remind God's people the things he's done, is doing, and or will do for them. So things he's done in the past, things he's currently doing for them, or things they can look forward to that he's going to do for them in the future. It's not commanded for Gentiles. And Gentile, if you don't know, that's anyone that's not Jewish. Right? It's a pretty big bucket there. It's not commanded for us, but it is beneficial. It is beneficial because we're taking what are otherwise ordinary days on our calendar, and we're setting aside more time to focus on God and something that he has done in the past or something he is going to do in the future. And I'll give you a secret too. All of the God-ordained holidays point toward Jesus in some way, shape, or form. They all have some level of fulfillment in Jesus himself. So these are important. These are things God has set aside. And one of the wonderful things about these holidays is that they haven't been commercialized. Right? Like there is no Passover bunny. There is no fat man that comes and gives you presents on the Day of Atonement. It doesn't happen. These holidays, the traditional observance of these holidays are completely centered on God and the things that he has done for his people. And that's one of the things that makes them so special. Our family's been celebrating many of these holidays for years now, and I can tell you that we've found it to be a tremendous blessing in our own lives to celebrate these holidays. And I can tell you that it's an amazing time to bond with God and also an amazing time to bond with family and friends. Because they're all days that are just otherwise regular, ordinary days in our calendar that we've set aside to remember something extraordinary. And who can't use more days in their life to remember something God has done? That's a good, positive thing for us to do. So as Rock and Refuge Church, over the next year, there are certain things we're going to put on our church calendar that we are going to be celebrating over this next year. So we're going to be celebrating some of the traditional church holidays. In 2 weeks, we're going to kick off Advent, and we're going to have that Advent season, and that's something we'll go through as a church together. We'll celebrate Christmas together. We're still in the process of figuring out if that's going to be the 23rd or the 24th. We're working out the logistics of that. We should have answers next week. But either way, we're going to have some kind of a service celebrating Christmas together as a group. We're going to have the season of Lent. We'll celebrate that together as well. It's kind of, it's fun for me because I didn't grow up in a denomination where we normally did Lent. So I had never even heard of Lent till I was an adult. And I've only ever really gone through it probably at 1 year at a church. So we're going to go through that together as a congregation. For some of you, that's going to be very familiar. For some of you, it might be a newer thing, but it's another way to focus on God. And then, of course, we'll be celebrating Easter as a congregation. And you can be praying about that because you know Easter is normally celebrated on Sunday mornings, and we don't really have a Sunday morning format at this point in time. So you can be praying now that God would provide some way, shape, or form that we can do a Sunday morning Easter service, because that's going to be very important to us. So when we do these things, we're going to kind of take the sermons and center them around it too. So we'll do sermon series centered around the holidays. We'll have an Advent series. We'll have a Lent series. Obviously, we'll have an Easter message. And we're also going to be giving you ideas of things you can do on your own, in your home, with your family to celebrate the holidays. But as a congregation, we're also going to celebrate some of these God-ordained holidays as well. We're going to spend some time celebrating Passover as a group. Pentecost, which is one that we're already kind of used to in the church. And then in the fall of next year, we're going to look at trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles, and we'll celebrate them together as a group as well. Once again, we'll have sermon series that kind of go around these messages to point to them and explain what they are and give us a better understanding of these particular holidays. And we'll also have ideas for things we can do on our own to celebrate at home with these things. And there's one other holiday that's been established by the Jewish people that I want to celebrate, and that one is on that top calendar too, right at the very top, and it's the holiday of Purim. That is not one of the holidays that God set up, but there are two holidays that the Jewish people themselves established that come through Scripture. Purim's one of them. It comes out of the book of Esther, and it's a reminder of a time when there was a person out there that tried to wipe out the entire race of Jewish people, and God provided for them and didn't allow that to happen. And I think in light of what's going on right now over in Israel and all the hatred that's being spewed out on the airways about the Jewish people in general, it's good for us to remember a time when God looked out for his people and that promise that God will not allow someone to wipe his people off the earth and perish. So as we shape what we do as a congregation over the next year, we'll be working things around these particular holidays. Just like you would with the holiday in your own life, the holidays get kind of set in stone on their dates where they're assigned, and everything else kind of works around it. So as a congregation, over the next year, we're going to be celebrating those holidays together and learning more and growing more in God during those times. But I don't want to wait until 2 weeks to start, right? Advent starts in 2 weeks, but I'd like to actually get started today. And so we're going to take a look at the very first holiday God ever established, and we're going to talk about how we can incorporate that into our own lives. So if you look at Leviticus chapter 23, the passage we read earlier, you can flip there in your Bibles. We're going to read the first 3 verses, and we're going to see the very first holiday God ever establishes for his people. In Leviticus 23, starting in verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, 'These are my appointed festivals, the appointed festivals of the Lord, which you are to proclaim according as sacred assemblies. There are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord.'" The Sabbath, the 7th day, that is a day that we are designed to celebrate as a holiday every single week. God has given his people a weekly holiday to celebrate. It's the very first holiday listed in Leviticus 23, but this holiday actually dates all the way back to creation. That's when God started to set the Sabbath in motion. We see it in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the 7th day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creation he had done." That word holy, it means set apart, different, special. God established all the way back in creation that the Sabbath was supposed to be a different kind of day, a special day, a day that is set apart and looks different than all the other days. In fact, it's such a big deal that it's part of the 10 Commandments. When you read through the 10 Commandments in Exodus 28 and you get to verse 8 through verse 11, it says this: "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord your God blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So in here he's instituting in the Ten Commandments that we are to celebrate the Sabbath weekly. And he points out that it reminds us of creation. It reminds us that we celebrate a Sabbath because God himself celebrated a Sabbath. So it's a reminder of creation. Then in Deuteronomy chapter 5, when Moses is reiterating the Ten Commandments to the people of God as they're getting ready to go into the promised land, he says this in the end of verse 14 and into verse 15, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So in Deuteronomy, he gives them the additional reminder, you celebrate a Sabbath to remind yourself that you are no longer slaves. And who brought you out of slavery? God brought you out of slavery. Remember what we said before, God is constantly reminding them, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt. He's telling them over and over again, and he's given them a weekly holiday to remind them of this as well. And this is a really big deal if you are an Israelite at the time. Imagine if you were in Israel at the time of coming out of the Exodus. You're a part of a people that have been slaves for 400 years. You were a slave your entire life. Your parents were slaves their entire life. Your grandparents were slaves their entire life. There's only one person among the nation of Israel that would have known what it was like to be a free man, and that would be Moses. Every other member of the nation of Israel had been slaves for their entire lives and had known no differently. Interesting thing about slaves, they don't get days off. Slaves don't get a 5-day work week or a 40-hour work week. Slaves work when they're told to work. Slaves are working 7 days a week. And so now God's saying, no, there's going to be 1 day a week where you don't work. So every single week you're going to be reminded that you're not a slave anymore. You are not obligated to work 7 days. 6 days you work. On the 7th day you rest. So the Sabbath is a weekly holiday. And it's also part of the natural rhythm and DNA, I believe, that God has built into each and every one of us with that Sabbath cycle he did at creation. I believe each and every human being is designed with a certain rhythm in mind, and it goes like this. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. This is something that God has established in us and that we are designed to do. Now, when the Bible talks about the Sabbath, those passages we read, there's a couple things it says to do, and there's one thing it says not to do. The first thing it says is to remember the Sabbath, or another way of saying that is to observe the Sabbath, to do something in relation to it. The second thing it says is we're supposed to keep it holy, so it's supposed to be different, special. The Sabbath day should be different than the other days of the week for us. And it talks about holding a sacred assembly. There should be some assembly of believers that occurs on the Sabbath. And there are things we are told not to do on the Sabbath, and that one thing is, very simply, work. We're supposed to refrain from work on the Sabbath. And we work by nature, right? We're not just talking about our job. We're talking about all the other things we do in our life that are work for us. And some of those things can look different for different people, right? Some of you might love cooking and enjoy cooking, and that is fun for you. For other people, cooking is work for them. And there's lots of different things like that. So that's what God has designed for us. And imagine what it must have been like to every week have a reminder that God has created everything. And every week have a reminder that God has delivered you from slavery. That's what he designed for the Israelites long ago. That's what he's designed for us today. We're built with an internal rhythm. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. Now, we as Christians, I think, in large, have really messed this up. Right? For many of us, our Sabbath days don't look that much different from our other days. And so I wonder, why do we get so bad at this? Why do we as Christians, like our observant Jewish brothers and sisters are very good about setting aside the Sabbath as a special day. Why have Christians gone so far away from that teaching? After all, it is one of the 10 Commandments, right? So you'd think this is one we take like very, very seriously. And in short, I say it's all Jesus' fault. But I say that jokingly. It's not really Jesus' fault. It's really our misunderstanding of Jesus when we look in the New Testament, how he relates to people on the Sabbath. When we see Jesus interacting on the Sabbath throughout the New Testament, we see things like the disciples are picking grain on the Sabbath and they're ridiculed for it, and Jesus stands up for them. We see Jesus heal a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath. We see him heal a woman with a bent back. we see him healing a man with abdominal swelling, or healing a blind man and commanding him to pick up his mat and walk. Over and over again, when we see Jesus discussing the Sabbath, he's fighting against restrictions that others had put on the Sabbath day. This was in our passage we read from the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 23, where it said, "Now if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath?" Now that might just sound kind of ordinary to you, but first century Israel, this was kind of like a mic drop moment where Jesus, like, boom, he brought it to them. Because you see, at the time, there were 613 different commandments that the Jewish people were responsible for following. And so we talked about this with our last series too, I think, a little bit, where, so one of the things that the Jewish people would try to do is they would rank the commands. Because what happens if command number 142 conflicts with command number 347? Like, how are you supposed to decide which one to follow and which one to disregard? And so this was a constant thing with rabbis at the time of trying to rank the commands and come up with which ones are more important, which ones are less important. This is where the whole idea of which is the greatest commandment comes from, and that whole series we just went through, because we want to know, like, which one trumps everything, which is the one command you never, ever violate regardless of any other commandment. And we know that is to love God with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our strength. But in the ranking of commandments, one of the things the rabbis tended to do is they tended to say that positive commandments supersede negative commandments. A positive commandment supersedes a negative commandment. And Jesus gives an example of this. You have this dilemma where the law of Moses requires you to circumcise a young child on the 8th day. So 8 days after any male child is born, they're required to be circumcised. But you're also not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And it was recognized that performing circumcision would be work. It'd be work for the person performing the circumcision. It might be work for the person that had to walk more than a Sabbath day's walk to get to where they would be circumcised. And so the dilemma comes, what do you do? Which command do you follow? Which do you not? Do we circumcise on like the 7th or 9th day so we don't violate Sabbath rest? Or do we circumcise on the 8th day and follow that command? And in this instance, the rabbis at the time had decided the positive command to circumcise on the 8th day superseded the negative command to refrain from work. And so it was commonly accepted at the time that circumcision on the 8th day was the way to do it, even if it was on the Sabbath. And so that's what Jesus used as an example when he was talking to the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, they had gotten to the point on Sabbath where they had swung the pendulum so far in one direction that they had gotten to a point where they thought that healing someone of a non-life-threatening ailment was not an appropriate reason to violate Sabbath rest. It was still appropriate if someone was dying to intervene, but they felt like, well, that's not a life-threatening ailment, so you can wait until it's a non-Sabbath day. And I think we as Christians, we've kind of taken the pendulum, we've swung it the other way, and a lot of times we've overcompensated to the point where we see that as restrictive and we see the fallacy behind that teaching. And so a lot of times we course correct too much to the other direction and figure we can do whatever we want with our Sabbath, and so we don't give it the kind of holy, special day that it's designed to be. And this must drive God crazy. I can just see him up there like, I made this for you. I made this as a blessing for you. Why don't you take advantage of the blessing that I have just handed to you? We were created with an internal rhythm. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. And the bottom line is, whether or not you and I choose to celebrate it, the Sabbath comes every week. Every single week, the Sabbath comes and the Sabbath goes. We can choose to participate in the blessing, or we can ignore it and not experience the full amount of blessing that God has there right out in front of us. But this weekly rhythm of work 6 days, rest 1 day is something that we are designed to do. Now, when is the Sabbath? That's a tricky question, right? That's a question that's divided churches and congregations over time. The actual biblical Sabbath that was set aside by God right at the beginning is Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. And the reason it starts at sundown is because when you look at the creation account, every day starts with there was evening and there was morning the first day, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So every time that the days are recounted in Genesis, the day starts with evening. So the Jewish people have carried that all the way to the day and said that their day is going to start when the sun goes down at evening, because that's when it was started in the creation story. So that is the actual biblical God-designed Sabbath. Now, most Christians, we celebrate the Sabbath on Sundays, right? And the reason that Christians decided to go away from the Saturday Sabbath and go to a Sunday Sabbath was simply because it's a celebration of the day Jesus rose. Jesus rose on the first day of the week, so we take the first day of the week to set aside as our Sabbath. So which one is correct? Which one is proper? Which one should we as Christians do? Which day is the right day? That's the wrong question, I think. The answer is we should have a day a week that we have set aside as an extra special day, as a holy day. So you think about it like doctors, nurses, pharmacists, police officers. Like, I'm really glad they work weekends. I'm really glad that if I have an ailment on the Sabbath, I can go to a doctor and get treated, right? So people like that, they have to pick sometimes different days to have as their Sabbath. But having at least one day off each week, I think, is essential. I remember years ago when I was working at when I was in the position where I was doing hiring for our company, I was trying to hire someone to do a certain position. And when you look at resumes, sometimes you see people have a gap in their resume, right, where they were working somewhere and then they left that company, but they didn't have another job yet. And so it's for an interviewer, that's always a red flag. Sometimes there's perfectly good reasons why you would leave a job without having another job. But as an interviewer, it's always a red flag that you want to deal with. So whenever I see that on a resume, one of the things I try to bring out in the interview is, why did you leave this job? And try to figure out, really, why did you leave this job when you didn't have another one lined up? Sometimes it's a perfectly good reason. Sometimes, I left to start a family and stay at home for a period of time and then go back to work later. Like, that's fine. But a lot of times it's a red flag if someone says, I'm willing to leave this job and not have anything else to do and have no form of income. Or sometimes it's a key that maybe they weren't willing to leave that job. Maybe they left because they were told they had to leave. And so I had a guy I was interviewing that seemed like a good candidate, but he was currently unemployed. He wasn't at his previous employer, which was Under Armour at the time. And so I remember asking him, like, why did you choose to leave Under Armour? And he said, this was back when Under Armour was like going through their surge where they were getting contracts with the NFL and with other major sporting outlets. And so they were booming and growing hand over fist. And he said it got to the point where they mandated a 7-day work week. And when they mandated a 7-day work week, he said he couldn't work 7 days because it would violate his religious convictions, and so he turned in his resignation. Right? He knew that he was willing to look for a job without a source of income because he was going to honor and celebrate a Sabbath. So if at all possible, the Sabbath day should be the same day every week. Now, I know some professions don't allow for this. Some professions have kind of rotating schedules and you can't. But I think the way God actually designed us is to have a set day of the week every week that is a Sabbath, and everything else revolves around it. Because it stays with that rhythm of work 6 days, rest 1 day, instead of, this week I work 4 days and rest 1, and then I work 10 days and rest 1. So it keeps us in that natural rhythm He's developed for us. And it also causes us to do exactly what the Sabbath is designed to do. To be just like any other holiday, a special day where we work everything else around the holiday. And this can be really hard, especially for people that work out of their house or self-employed people, right? Because there's always something more you can be doing, especially if it's your own business. Like, I can always work on this a little bit and work on that a little bit, and the next thing you know, you're working 7-day work weeks and you didn't even realize it. So how do we change this? How do we get to a point where we can start to wrap our heads around celebrating the Sabbath and making this a special day that we set apart in coming close to God? So first off, I think what we can do is figure out what's going to be your regular weekly Sabbath. Like, I think a lot of us have been kind of faced with the dilemma ever since church changed to Saturday, right? Is Saturday my Sabbath now because that's when I have church? Or is Sunday my Sabbath now? Some of you guys are going to church on Saturday and Sunday. That's great. You're getting 2 times where you're gathering together and coming to God. And that's spectacular. But first things first, if you're trying to set aside a Sabbath, figure out which of the 2 days is your Sabbath, right? Are you going to do Sunday Sabbath or are you going to do Saturday Sabbath? And then do an honest evaluation of what your Sabbath day looks like right now. How different does it look from your other days of the week? Are there things you're doing on that you would constitute as work? Are there things that need to change in your Sabbath routine right now? And then, as individuals, we do a little bit of addition and subtraction. A little bit of addition and subtraction. We start by subtracting. Recognize the things you're doing on the Sabbath now that you consider work and start subtracting those things out. What are the things that you do that you feel like are work? And I'm not talking about your 40-hour, 50-hour week job. I'm talking about doing the dishes, right? Like, nope, maybe... You can never say no, but there's somebody out there that loves doing the dishes. I haven't met them yet. If I do, they can come over to my house anytime they want. So maybe for your Sabbath, you either set aside the dishes and save them for the next day, Or you decide that we're going to eat on paper plates and use plastic utensils on the Sabbath, and that's going to be your Sabbath routine. Right? Maybe just some of the other mundane tasks like working on the bills or doing laundry are the things that you find drudgery in. And so those are things where like 6 days a week I can work on that, but my Sabbath day I'm not going to work on those things. I remember a while back we had the boys in this routine of having to clean their rooms regularly as part of their allowance. And I remember one time telling them like, okay, you guys are going to have to clean your room. And they're like, but Dad, it's a Sabbath. I can't work on the Sabbath. And I'm like, you got me there. So I had to stand behind what I had been teaching them about Sabbath and not require them to clean their room on the Sabbath. So to this day, 6 days a week they can clean their room, but the Sabbath they do not have to. Right, so, but find the things in your life that are the mundane things that you consider to be work and start cutting them out of your Sabbath day. And then when you do that, you're going to have extra time. And then with that extra time, you can start to add. You start to add life-giving activities, things that help you, energize you, and lift you up. Some of these life-giving activities should be specifically focused on God. So maybe for you, spending time in nature is a way you like to connect with God. I know it's getting a little cold out there for that now, but you get a nice day on the Sabbath and you decide, I'm going to go spend some time in nature. Maybe for you, listening to worship music is a way you connect with God, and so you might have a playlist you're playing in the house, or you might sing some songs. Maybe you want to have a Sabbath prayer journal, a prayer journal that you only write in on the Sabbath day for like an extra special time with God. Or maybe there's a certain book by a Christian author you like, and that's going to be your Sabbath book. That's going to be the one that you read and connect with God that way, specifically on the Sabbath day. And there's other life-giving activities we can do, too, that you can start to incorporate in. Maybe you like to take a nap, right? And you just want to be able to take a nap guilt-free and not have to worry about all the stuff that needs to get done. Maybe watching a movie or playing video games or something you want to do. But find the things that give you, that energize you, that excite you, that make you happy, and incorporate those into the time that you've taken the work away from. This is the way we're designed to live. This is the way God has designed for us, because then it serves to re-energize us. There's always going to be more work to do, but God has designed us work 6 days, rest 1 day. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. So for me, when I look at my Sabbath commitment, this has become increasingly difficult for me as of late, because my entire routine is flipped around now as we've been doing this church, and so I'm trying to figure out what to do, because I've still got my regular work week that I'm doing. I'm picking up additional responsibilities, trying to get a church started, and I'm trying to figure out how do I fit all this in and still honor a Sabbath. So as I look at it, this is what I've come up with. I really wrestled with, should I make my Sabbath on Saturday now, or should I make it Sunday? My Sabbath continues to be Sunday, because there's a lot of times where preparation for the service, some of the stuff I have to do to prepare feels like work. And so if I'm going to be doing that on Saturday, I might as well take Sunday to make as my Sabbath day. The things I'm subtracting out of my Sabbath day, running errands. It doesn't mean I never go out shopping or anything. I mean, last week Amy and I went out and we did some Christmas shopping for her. That was really fun. But errands, going to the grocery store, going to Walmart, things like that. I'm going to not incorporate those into my Sabbath. Those are things I'm going to take out of my Sabbath so that I have extra time. And then the one thing that I tried before and I want to get back to trying again now is dinner prep, right? Because I'm the one that cooks on Sundays, and I don't actually mind cooking. And if it's a new recipe, it's actually really exciting and fun. But if it's a recipe I've cooked for like the 40th or 50th time, then it's kind of drudgery to like do all the prep work. So I'm going to do the prep work. So like what we're eating tomorrow, I'm going to go home and do the prep work tonight, so that tomorrow I can just throw everything in and cook it. And it'll be much simpler, much easier. In that way, it'll be more restful for me on the Sabbath. Things I'm going to add in, one of them is already something I do. It's that special devotional time I have with God Sunday mornings, where everyone else is asleep, and it's just me on the couch with the dogs and my cup of coffee, and I spend my time with God. That's one of the things that I use in that space that I would normally have to spend doing something else. And I think I'm going to start spending some time playing video games with the boys on Sundays too, for some of our Sabbath time, because it's something that the three of us can enjoy doing together that we all really like. So the wonderful thing about it is you can be completely unproductive 1 day out of the week, guilt-free, and actually you were designed to operate that way. God has given you permission. God actually wants you to operate that way. And so we have this gift from God. So I hope in doing this that you're willing to do this for yourself as well. But to do it in order, you have to prepare ahead of time. Think about Christmas, right? Think about all the preparation we do in anticipation of Christmas each and every year, in all the time we spend. We can do that with our Sabbath as well. But I hope that each of you takes that seriously and takes the commitment seriously to come before God with their Sabbath, set it aside as a special day. and work into that rhythm in your life now of work 6 days, rest 1 day. Work 6 days, rest 1 day. Let's go to God in prayer. God, I thank you. God, I thank you for giving us these holidays, these special days set aside to remember you and the wonderful things you have done. God, I pray that as we go forth from here, that you would just energize us and remind us that the Sabbath is one of those holidays. It's a day for us designed to draw close to you. God, I pray that you would work on each and every one of our hearts to show us what are things we're doing right now that are work, things that we need to eliminate on our Sabbath day. And that you would also show us what are things that are life-giving, things that draw us closer to you, things that re-energize our heart and our soul and our spirit that we can incorporate into the day. God, give each of us a real sense of clarity and a real sense of conviction to follow through and do those things. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen.